House Democrats have thrown a roadblock into President Obama's announced tax plan compromise. What's the White House strategy now for bringing them back into the fold and making the accord law? We're joined now by Austan Goolsbee, the president the president's chairman, I should say, of the Council of Economic Advisors. Austan, thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate it on this what looks like a very cold Washington day. Let me ask you first of all about the House Democrats. They seem to be starting a sort of insurrection here. What do you do about that?
Well, you know, I'm just a policy guy. I'm not the legislative strategist. I will say, you know, I think people can quibble about this, that, or the other provision, but the broad framework, I think people are starting to congeal around, noting, number one, the president got far more in terms of his priorities than anybody expected him to be able to do in an environment like this. And number two, that taken as a whole, despite the rather bitter pill that we would have high-income tax cuts that we know don't work, we get 2 to 3 times that directed to the president's priorities in a way that would be majorly beneficial to the economy. So you saw today most of the private forecasters come out and revise for the better their estimates of how the job market and how the overall economy would do in the next year if they were to carry through with this tax deal.
Hey, Austan, you're more than just a policy guy. I know that. I mean, let me just ask you, I mean, do you think ultimately we're going to get this done by Christmas, before the end of the year?
I do think that we are in that situation. The president said we've got to do that before Christmas. Taxes start going up on ordinary workers January 1st. If we fumble around and let their taxes rise by several $1,000s, shame on us, because that would be a major blow to the economy. So I think, as I say, if you take a step back and look at the broad framework, there's pretty wide consensus that this would be quite beneficial to the economy to get this done. And we live to fight another day on those high-income tax cuts. The president doesn't think they work, thinks they're a bad idea, but he got, you know, more than double the amount of those tax cuts for priorities that do work. Middle-class tax cuts, payroll tax, investment incentives for business and things like that.
Well, and occasionally in Washington, the two parties have to work together to get things done. Yep. Let me ask you about the payroll tax holiday. Economists have been advising us that this is a great idea to spur job creation for years now. You finally include this in the compromise, but it's only for the employee side, reducing it from 6.2% to 4.2%. Why not reduce the employer side and make it cheaper to hire people? If job growth is indeed the president's #1 focus, why don't you do that?
Well, obviously, a lot of this comes down to what are the budgetary implications and how much money do we have and what are we trading off. But I would say direct tax relief to middle-class workers and the unemployment benefits are quite important so that we don't yank the rug out from under their consumption in the short run. And on the business side, we've been putting some focus, as you saw there with the investment incentives, on trying to facilitate their building factories, buying equipment as sort of the complement to the worker side. So I think we just approach it from a different angle, but it's meant to be done as a package.
Let me ask you about the unemployment benefits. The Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco did a study and estimates that about 0.8% of the current 9.8% unemployment comes from the last extension of unemployment benefits. We all obviously want to be compassionate. We all want to help honest, hardworking people that have run into tough times, and there are obviously benefits to the extensions. They get more time to look for better jobs. But at what point do you want to incentivize people to go out there and work, or not disincentivize people?
Well, I'd say two things. Number one, that study is a bit of an outlier on the high side of what the impact on unemployment is. There are a lot of people who think it's significantly smaller. And number two, let's remember how these unemployment benefits work. Number one, if your state's conditions improve, so the unemployment rate goes down in your state, the benefits automatically start scaling back. And two, the way unemployment benefits work, you don't get any benefits unless you are actively searching for a new job. The reason that you've got these long-term unemployed people searching for jobs is a very tough job market. Well, this is the worst recession since 1929, and I think pulling the rug out from under them when they're actively searching for work and their state's job markets are just not in the place they need to be is a bad idea.
You know, Austin, one thing I think a lot of people can agree on is that we need an overhaul of the whole tax code. You had Ben Bernanke talking about it in 60 Minutes, saying the tax code is very inefficient. No surprises there. When do we start to see somebody really taking a stab at that, overhauling the whole tax system, the tax code? Or is that something, another can that everybody just continues to kick down the road here?
Well, no, you know, we'll have to see how that plays out. The president is certainly, he set up the Fiscal Commission, and that was one of the central themes of the Fiscal Commission is we ought to broaden the base and lower the rate, you know, on the corporate side, on the personal side. I think that holds a lot of appeal. I don't know if Republicans in Congress are committed to that, but I know the president has for quite some time been actively open to that.
I wonder, Austin, as an economist, you know, David Stockman has come on here and said, even though he famously worked for Ronald Reagan, he's against the tax cuts. He thinks it's just sort of putting more money in voters' pockets from Uncle Sam's credit cards. It does seem, though, that you are focused, and that indeed everyone in Washington is focused more on the demand side than the supply side. Wouldn't it make sense if you wanted to reduce unemployment to focus a little bit more on the supply side?
Well, I don't think I agree with the premise. I'd say if you look at there's significant investment incentives that the president insisted on putting into this tax deal. The direct investment tax write-offs for companies to build factories and buy equipment, which even by any measure of supply side, there's a significant supply side component. Through the Recovery Act, the president's had a lot of incentives for the private sector to expand supply, trying to get the private sector stood up. So I'd say some short-run demand side is clearly warranted, but also investing in the supply side the president agrees with, and that in the long run we got to have competitiveness and growth, and we're going to grow our way out of this. That's the centerpiece of his strategy. So I think it's important that we think of both. I'm not disagreeing with that.
All right, hey, Austin, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Austan Goolsbee there, Chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors in Washington.